So interviews can not only be taken one-to-one in kind of semi or unstructured formats, they can also be undertaken one-to-many. In this case, interviews take the form of a focus group. Focus groups or group interviews are different from one-to-one interviews in that it's possible to gain the opinions of a large number of people for comparatively little time and expense. As a consequence, they're often recommended to researchers wishing to orientate themselves to a new field. Focus groups provide an excellent opportunity to gather information about a new topic. For this reason, focus groups are often used by political parties to gain insight over policy ideas, by market researchers concerned with names and advertising campaigns for new products, and by corporations interested in consumers and their attitudes to particular goods and services. However, they're also very useful for social researchers interested in finding out more about the social world. So the group interview is essentially a qualitative data gathering technique that relies upon the systematic questioning of several individuals simultaneously. Group interviews can take different forms depending on their purpose. They can be brainstorming sessions with little or no structure, or they can be very structured, which is often the case in terms of marketing focus groups. So in a group interview, the interviewer or moderator directs the inquiry and the interaction amongst the responses either in a very structured or a very unstructured manner, depending on the purpose. The skills that are required to conduct the group interview are therefore not significantly different from those needed for individual interviews. The interviewer must be flexible, they must be empathic and persuasive, and a good listener. But the group format does present some problems not found in the individual interview format. As May has outlined on a previous podcast, as most of our lives are spent interacting with others, it comes as no surprise that our actions and opinions are modified according to the social situation in which we find ourselves. So how do we act when we're in a group? Are we dominant? Do we lead conversation and decide what other people are going to say and do? Or are we more wallflowers, shy and reluctant to voice our opinions? So if we think about that situation in relation to a group interview, it's vital that the interviewer moderates these different personalities and encourage participation by everybody. So we want to make sure that it's not only the dominant ones who speaks in a focus group. We don't want them to generate all the conversation, and because they might have strong political opinions or strong opinions on any subject matter, it might deter the more quiet ones in a group from raising their opinions. Therefore, we don't want this idea of groupthink to happen, that it's the dominant people's opinions that become the ideas for the whole group. And because people don't want to, in a social situation, perhaps have conflict and have outright arguments with people that they don't know, they just go, yes, okay, I agree with that. When perhaps, if we did a one-to-one interview, they wouldn't. So the interviewer in a focus group situation needs to make sure that groupthink doesn't happen, that we make sure everyone's opinions, those confident and able to express their opinions articulately, have equal opportunity to those who are perhaps shyer and perhaps less vocal in a social situation. So the group interview is therefore a really useful exercise to gather a lot of information, but we have to be very sensitive to the ways in which knowledge is constructed in this rather odd social situation. And for that reason, group interviews are often undertaken with pre-existing groups, so people know one another, and so people's opinions can be articulated more freely and openly. Rapport has already been built up between the members of a focus group. So focus groups are often undertaken with people with a pre-existing dynamic, either an existing group of friends, perhaps people are part of the same sports club or the same social club, or indeed people are part of the same political party, perhaps through a community council, or indeed members of a local campaign group. These are the opportunities where focus groups, one-to-many, can generate a lot of information really rather quickly and efficiently. So how do we act when we're in a group? Are we dominant, leading conversation and deciding what other people are going to say and do? Or are we wallflowers, shy and reluctant to voice our opinions? In a group interview, it's vital that the interviewer moderates between these different personalities and make sure everyone has the opportunity to say their piece. We must encourage participation by all, even the quiet ones. We need to stop one person from dominating and manage different opinions to prevent this notion of groupthink. We can see, therefore, that knowledge produced here is not scientific in nature, but with all qualitative methods, it becomes a product of the interaction between those involved. Each interview or focus group will be different and produce different variations and opinions. Groups that may be good to do focus groups with involve those with a pre-existing constitution, a pre-existing dynamic, for example, a group of friends. Often researchers attempt to construct an homogeneous group as possible, a group that is pretty much the same. The idea being is to simulate a group of friends who have things in common and feel relaxed talking to one another. So if we're undertaking a one-to-one interview or a one-to-many interview, if we're taking as a traditional interview or a focus group, it's important to consider the following issues. Firstly, we need to consider who is the best person to interview to answer our research question. How are we going to identify a key stakeholder who would be interesting to interview? This is where our background literacy on the subject is important. We need to find out who is active in a particular campaign, issue or political subject, and who may have information that can help us. We then need to decide how to access them for an interview. We may do this by letter, by email or by telephone. How are we going to present ourselves professionally and courteously? And how are we going to present ourselves ethically, asking them clearly what we want from them and what the data is going to be used for. We may not be able to access the person we want to interview directly. We might need to use a gatekeeper, perhaps someone in an organisation who can give us access to the right person, or perhaps someone that we know who can give us access to someone in an institution, corporation or local organisation. We may even be able to ask a previous interviewee to recommend someone they know for an interview, someone who we may not have come across but they know quite intimately. Increasingly too, we may be able to recruit interviewees via social media like Facebook. Second, we need to consider how we present ourselves at interview. The way we present ourselves is important, including our appearance, our behaviour, our language, our body language, our courtesy, etc. We need to use all these aspects of our presentation in order to establish a rapport with interviewees. So, for example, dressing in a professional way when interviewing business people or representatives of government agencies would be a good thing. Dressing smartly and professionally may also reassure people that we don't know, or elderly people, that we are professional academics that need to be taken seriously, and perhaps our research project has a degree of authority as a consequence. Being late, being scruffy, being impolite is unlikely to bode well for a good interview situation. However, for interviews with people involved with sort of family issues around a home, issues around protest movements, for example, perhaps a more casual style of dress might be appropriate. We need to consider, if you like, our social positionality and marry that up to the social positionality of people we're seeking to interview. So when conducting any type of interview, it's important to avoid these common mistakes. Common mistakes include failure to listen carefully to the responses that we get from an interview. It's important to show interest in the interviewee and follow up answers with new questions that perhaps are relevant and in line with the previous responses. Next, don't ask vague questions. Be as specific as possible so you can get precisely the answers that you want. Often asking questions that need a yes/no answer don't generate new forms of conversation, but rather very short answers. We want to get inside people's heads and get them to use their own vocabulary. So ask searching questions in line with the sorts of languages that they might use themselves in order to get them talking in the first place. Also, don't ask leading questions. In trying to be as precise as we can with our questions, you don't want to leave questions too open-ended that give your opinion about a certain subject or preclude the interviewee from answering in a particular way. Don't let the interview go on for too long. Try and be as concise and precise as possible. You want to generate conversation, but you don't want to meander, you don't want to go down too many conversational cul-de-sacs. Your time and your interviewee's time is precious, so make it as apposite and direct as possible. Of course, you don't want to bore the interviewee either. By making your questions interesting, by showing interest in their answers, you can make this conversation with a purpose an entertaining as well as an informative experience. Finally, be sure to record your interview, either by taking handwritten notes or by recording with an audio device, often available through people's mobile phones. You can make sure you have a record of that interview so it can be transcribed and analysed accurately. With these thoughts in mind, you're well prepared to begin conducting your interviews or focus groups.